Hey, welcome back to the channel, guys. In this video, we are going to go over an extract, a passage from the book Iron Ambition by Mike Tyson, where he speaks about his life with Cus D'Amato. This passage covers the psychology of fighting according to Cus, fear, and the consequences of a lack of fear. And as a little bonus, you will find out the reason why Mike Tyson probably beat Evander Holyfield's ear. Cus was always acknowledged as being one of the first trainers to concentrate on the psychology of his boxers. At various times during his career, he said that boxing was 50, 60, and once even 85% mental. So early in his career, he began developing psychological theories of behavior that could be applied to boxing. One of the first places he looked was the work of Sigmund Freud. People talk about me reading Freud, but all I ever read of him was 10 chapters in one of those paperback books I picked up somewhere. He told Sports Illustrated. I read those 10 chapters and then it was getting technical, so I put the book away. Freud hadn't told me anything I didn't know already, he told another reporter. Cus began my psychological training for real once I moved into the house. The first thing he did was to give me a book by Peter Heller called In This Corner. It was a great book because it was interviews with all-time great fighters. Cus thought that this was essential reading because all these immortals were admitting their fears in the book. Controlling fear and making it work for you was the cornerstone of Cus's philosophy of life. Giants like Jack Dempsey were as scared as I was. He's a cancer like me, very emotional. But once he got into that ring, you would never think that he was frightened. Deep down, he thought he was a coward, same as me. Yet, he was the face of ferocity when he was fighting. And that's something. Henry Armstrong was another guy who, like Dempsey, was a hobo during the Great Depression, riding the rails, getting to a new town, fighting for food, getting beat up. That's how they learned to fight. Armstrong would get up in the morning and run 15 miles to work, and then run 15 miles home, and then he would train. You know what his job was? Hitting spikes into railroad rails for 8 hours a day. He was the only guy with 3 championships simultaneously. Cus thought he was the epitome of determination and will, who crushed his opponent's spirits. But the best example of learning about fear was the Willie Ritchie story. That's how I learned to have still nerves. Ritchie was a Polish lightweight who had the championship in 1912. He fought a guy who was a little bigger and it was a tough fight, but they called it a draw. The promoter smacked Willie on his back and said, "Hey, you got lucky tonight, kid. You've got to fight a rematch in 2 weeks." Ritchie was petrified. He thought the guy had kicked his ass and he had gotten a gift. He was so scared that it took him an hour to tie his fucking shoes and put his shorts on and get in the gym and work out. At the weigh-in, he was sweating. He couldn't eat. He thought he was sick. He thought he was going to get killed. As he was about to weigh in, his opponent's manager came up and smacked him on the back and said, "Okay, we took it easy on you last time. Tonight, we're knocking you out quick." Ritchie was an emotional wreck, but he didn't show his fear to anybody. He was about to call the fight off, but somehow he summoned the discipline and got up on the scale. Then he waited for the other guy. After a few hours, it was clear that his opponent wasn't showing. Richie got the whole purse. What Richie learned from that was no matter how frightened he was, his opponent was more afraid of him. When I read that story, I knew that I had that advantage. I knew how they felt, and they didn't know how I felt. Even though I was afraid when I was fighting, I thought, they're more afraid of me than I am of them. Besides making me read the book, Cus gave me what he called the talk. Cus felt that most kids who want to be fighters hadn't learned how to cope emotionally. He thought that to teach a fighter, you had to first solve his emotional problems and do it in a way that the pupil is no longer embarrassed about feeling things like fear. Cus called that peeling away the layers of personality. His theory were very similar to those of Wilhelm Reich, a pupil of Freud, who talked about a person's essential life force, orgone energy, getting bound throughout the body by armoring process that had to be manipulated until the life force could be released. Once you peeled away the layers of childhood trauma and embarrassments, then you could be receptive to Cus's teaching. I've heard 100 different versions of Cus's fear rap, but the way he laid it out in the 60s when he was interviewed for a video that was produced by Jim Jacobs, who would go on to be my first manager, is really special. When I have a new boy, the first thing I do is give him a lecture. And although I don't expect him to remember fully the things I tell him, by repetition, once I give him the complete lecture, I expect him, when circumstances present themselves related to the lecture, that they might possibly recall what I've said and therefore not be intimidated by the circumstances they come to face with. Cus said, "Now, the lecture of fear goes something like this. All people are afraid. Being afraid is very normal, a healthy thing. If an individual is not afraid, I would have to send them to a psychiatrist to find out what was wrong with them. Nature gave us fear in order to survive. And of course, fear is our best friend. Without fear, we would all die. We'll do something foolish or stupid, which will cause our death or being crippled. But also, fear is something which has to be controlled. I always compare it to fire. Fear, like fire, must be controlled. And once it gets out of control, like fire, could destroy everything around. Not only the individual, everything around you. So once you control fear, like fire, you could make it work for you. Without fire, we wouldn't have the civilization we now recognize. But the fighter who controls his fear can now function in a manner far over and beyond anything he was capable of before. No matter how ugly a person is, no matter whether he behaves or not, if he saves my life, if he's always there when I'm in trouble, then I forget about how obnoxious he is. I look upon him as my friend and accept him as such. Well, that's what fear is. Fear is your friend, and nature gave us fear in order for us to survive. And I give the example of the deer crossing an open field and coming to the forest, and instincts telling him danger is present in the trees, perhaps in the form of a mountain lion. At that moment, the adrenal gland injects adrenaline into the bloodstream. The heart beats faster, enabling the deer to perform an extraordinary feat of agility. In the first leap, The deer can possibly jump 30 or 40 feet, sufficient to get out of the immediate danger, and the natural asset of speed which nature gave it would save it. Now, we as human beings, in my opinion, we tame these qualities so that they are somewhat dormant because we live in a civilized atmosphere. But nevertheless, faced with a situation that intuition tells us danger is present, these natural assets that nature gave us to survive come to the surface. And if we don't panic, if we maintain the discipline and the control over it, we can use them, and they not only help us survive the particular instance, but continued success will give us a comfort that is so strong and a foundation so powerful that in time we can get to overcome almost anything. So you explain to your fighters that this feeling of fear prior to a fight is normal and healthy, and that he shouldn't be apprehensive about it? Jimmy asked. Not only that, but before they have a fight, I tell them what they are going to experience. The night before his first fight, just say it's an amateur fight. He won't be able to sleep all night, I say. When you wake up in the morning, you're going to say, how in the world am I going to fight? I didn't sleep last night. The only consolation I could offer him is that his opponent went through the same thing. So in effect, it's an even fight. Secondly, when he gets in that corner and looks across the ring at his opponent, that fellow is going to be the biggest, most powerful person in the world. When he gets in the corner and loosens up, that fellow is going to look like the most experienced fighter. Although it's his first fight, this is the imagination at work, exaggerating the obstacles. But if he remembers the things that I tell him, he knows that I told him this was going to happen. And then he faces this with confidence. And when he knows this and understands this and confronts the type of situation I explained long before he gets into the ring, his opponent now is less intimidating. Hopefully, some of my words will reach him in that fearful state just before the bell rings. Cus did get something out of his time in the army. He was issued a paperback to read called Psychology for the Fighting Man: What You Should Know About Yourself and Others. It was published by the National Research Council's Emergency Committee on Psychology, and some of America's leading psychologists contributed to it. Among them, Gordon Allport and E.G. The book focused on the psychology of ordinary GIs, not their higher level officers, and it was full of practical information on boosting morale and adjusting to army life. The book contained a frank discussion about fear. When you read it, you can see how it helped hone Cus's theory about both fear and the importance of traumatic childhood experiences. The mental habits of childhood are usually carried on in more or less disguised form all throughout life. This is sometimes good and sometimes bad for the adults, depending on what sort of childhood they had. In chapter 9, the author talks about how habit formation is an excellent stage of learning. No action ever becomes automatic by learning in words how to perform it, but without actually practicing it. But by repetition, the operation of a machine or a rifle gets itself reduced to habit so that it becomes almost or entirely mechanical. This would form the basis of Cus's insistence that boxing is best learned throughout repetition, and was echoed in Cus's training innovation called the Willy Bag, which I'll get to later. Cus didn't make these lectures seem abstract. He always brought in his own life experiences and told his pupils that he too experienced fear. When he was about 14, there was a man in the Bronx who hid in lonely places and jumped out and attacked people. The newspapers called him the Gorilla Man. One night, Cus was late getting home, and he decided to take a shortcut throughout a vacant lot with grass as high as Cus's head. He was walking down the path when he saw a murky figure in front of him. It looked like the giant, with his arms spread out, ready to attack. Cus was sure it was the Gorilla Man. His first instinct was to get the hell out of there, but then he checked himself. If I run now, I'll never be able to take this shortcut again, he thought. So he confronted his fear and marched straight ahead. And the Gorilla Man was only a tree that had most of its branches cut off. In the darkness, its silhouette looked just like a gorilla's. Cus said that proves that there is nothing as bad as imagination. From then on, anytime he was confronted with an obstacle in life, he would say to himself, "That's just a tree in my path." When Cus was 20, he had his first fight in a gym. He was hanging around the gym, hitting the heavy bags, when a manager who was there seemed impressed and asked him if he'd like to box. He put Cus in with baby Arizmendi, a Mexican fighter who trained at that gym. Arizmendi had beaten the great Henry Armstrong twice. While I was waiting, I experienced fear in the ring for the first time in my life. Cus told the reporter, "I couldn't understand what was making me feel this way. My heart was pounding. I thought it might be that I was afraid, but I wasn't sure. Going into that ring was like going to the electric chair." Arizmendi beat the crap out of Cus, breaking his nose and closing his one good eye. He asked Cus if he wanted to go another round and went over to Cus. "What a tough monkey you are," he complimented him. It was an acknowledgement that Cus had learned to conquer his fear. Cus used that incident to make sure that his fighters were never ashamed of being afraid, that it was normal to feel fear. Cus told me that in all his years in boxing, there were only 2 fighters who never experienced any fear. The first was a deaf mute Cus managed and who would routinely take a horrible beating. The other guy was a Jewish boxer named R.T. Diamond. Diamond was discovered when he, as a newspaper peddler, he beat up an older man who had the corner R.T. wanted. After a stint in the Navy, R.T. came back and started training under Cus. But Cus realized he was not a normal guy. When he was on the way to the ring for his first amateur bout, I come into the ring and I'm holding the rope down, and all of a sudden I hear a dog growling. Cus told one of his pupils. I'm like, who the hell got a dog? And I look around and it's Artie coming under the bottom rope, growling, frothing at his mouth. The bell rang and Artie charged out and gave his opponent a savage beating. Artie got hit to prove he wasn't afraid, Cus said. Not that he was a macho man, he was just a maniac. Despite Archie's 80-2 amateur record, including 15 straight knockouts, Cus forced Artie to retire at 22 after a few years as a pro because he was taking too much unnecessary punishment. A few weeks later, Artie and a few friends took out an armored truck in the South Bronx. In the struggle, Artie shot the guard in the head, paralyzing him for life. He was sent to Sing Sing to serve a 7 and a half to 15-year sentence. On his first day in prison, Artie was strolling through the yard, smoking a cigar, when a big black inmate approached him. "Hey, come here, good looking," the black guy hissed. Artie couldn't believe he was talking to him. "White boy, I'm talking to you." "How can I help you?" Artie said, playing dumb. The black guy pulled Artie toward him and told him he'd have a pleasant stay with all the cigars and contraband food he could want, as long as he would be the black guy's #1 bitch. Artie nodded agreement and took the black guy's head in his hand. He leaned over as if he was going to whisper sweet nothings in the guy's ear, but he suddenly let out a blood-curdling shriek and bit a large chunk of the guy's ear off. As the black guy ran away in pain, Artie calmly looked at his huge audience in the yard, spit out a piece of the ear, and snarled. Years later, Artie would say, "Everybody was sitting there laughing, and I turned around and spit it out at them. That was my only regret in my life. I should have chewed it and swallowed it and showed them how vicious I really was." Artie was sent to the hole for a month, and on the day he got out, he asked around to find out who were the bosses among the various ethnic groups in the prison. He then proceeded to beat the shit out of all of them in one day. After 8 years, Cus was able to get Artie out of jail by hiring him as Jose Torres' conditioning coach. I bet Jose listened to everything Artie said. Artie did a few more stints in jail, and then he came out and got a job as head of security for a Spanish nightclub. He got involved in a dispute with a patron, and he was shot once in the heart and died. Artie never had any fear. He couldn't have died any other way, Cus said. There is so much to analyze and to reflect upon after this passage. But the one thing that comes to my mind is, was Mike Tyson inspired to bite Evander Holyfield's ear from the story of Artie? And also, this is a cautionary tale about too much fearlessness, because a lack of fear basically is recklessness, and recklessness is not an intelligent form of emotion. So be on guard, be brave, not reckless. And I hope that you guys like this video. Let me know what you thought about this this reading, and what are your thoughts on the approach that Cus had. And stay tuned for part 3. Hey, I'm Telemann. I put a lot of time and effort in these videos, so if you like it, make sure you subscribe and you watch the next video. Also, I would really appreciate if you could go down in the description and donate to support Palestine and some other causes around the world. That's it. Like, subscribe, and share.